What if I told you that the first Evil Dead movie wasn't actually the first Evil Dead movie? Before the Fede Alvarez 2013 version, before Army of Darkness, before Evil Dead 1981, we turn the clocks back to 1978 for Sam Raimi's first attempt at the Evil Dead franchise with Within the Woods. Hi, I'm Matt Keim, and welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. So, as I said in my preamble, the first Evil Dead movie wasn't actually the first Evil Dead movie. So Sam Raimi's idea for the Evil Dead, while naturally the story ideas grew and evolved in very, very wild ways over the course of the years, the ideas had been lying around since the mid-70s. This is long before Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, Scott Spiegel, before any of them were involved in any Hollywood circles. This is back when they were still just high school and college students at Michigan State and spending the summers in their hometown of Detroit, Michigan. So because they had these ideas, but they didn't necessarily always have the connections to finance the ideas, they had to be creative with what they wanted to do next. Director Sam Raimi and star Bruce Campbell knew from the get-go that they wanted to do a story about the unfortunate plight of some college students who stumble upon some demonic entities while on vacation visiting a cabin in the woods. But they had no money. They always wanted to turn it into a feature, but money was a huge roadblock. And so what they decided to do is that they decided to do a proof of concept film. And thus, Within the Woods was born. Before I go too far into this video, I know that this is normally a review show, with the exception of the occasional video essay I end up doing. This is neither. I mean, it's more the latter than the former. This is still technically within the scope of the review show. I'm not actually going to give this one a rating because I don't think it would be really fair to review this movie, and there's two reasons for that. The first one is that this film is more of a proof of concept short film. It's a fascinating look at the history of one of the quirkier and more unique horror franchises out there. It was never intended for public consumption. It was intended to raise funds for what became the Evil Dead. And so, because it has those intentions, it's just showing off these ideas and these concepts. It's not a fully fledged. You can tell a lot of the ideas are half-baked, and that the concepts and scene and the mise-en-scene, and like a lot of this is so half-baked and so raw that comparing it to something that was intended as a full release, I think that'd be a bit of a disingenuous comparison to make, because you can't judge it by the same standards, and so I'm not going to. The second reason is that copies of this are incredibly hard to find. You can find bootleg versions on, like, the last time I saw this, it was on like a Facebook video link. There was some footage on YouTube that has been since taken down, but literally every version I've been able to find on this thing is like the audio and some scenes are missing, or the picture just freeze frames that part. And so it's an incomplete product, which kind of adds to the mystique, in my opinion. And so instead, I want to talk about the process of this short little film. A proof of concept film it's intended to show off or showcase an idea with the intention of generating interest, generating funds, so you can do a more full-fledged version. One of the most famous examples of a proof of concept film is the short film Saw. We've all heard of the Saw franchise. We've even covered it here on this channel. Saw actually does kind of have a similar history, where it's a couple of friends fresh out of school who have this great idea for a horror film, don't quite know how to get it done, and so what they do is that they make a low-budget short showcasing some of these ideas, and then they show it, they got it in front of the right people, and the franchise blew up from there. Now, with Saw, the short film, you can say that that's actually a lot more fully fledged than even this is. With the Saw short film, a lot of the most famous iconography from that franchise is present from the get-go. There's the doll, there's the waking up in the TV, there's that famous reverse bear trap scene, which is probably the only trap outside of maybe the bathroom one that keeps appearing over and over and over again in that franchise. Within the Woods, you do see a lot of these early ideas, and there are just from camera angles to even little visual gags like the porch swinging wildly and hitting the wall. which is something that made it into Evil Dead. But the story is really, really different. The source of the demonic possessing is different. This one kind of uses the Indian burial ground tropes that were actually very popular to use in the 70s. One of the interesting things is that young Bruce Campbell and young Sam Raimi were not the only ones involved with that would stick with the franchise. A young Scott Spiegel, who would go on to help write Evil Dead 2, he plays Scotty in this film. He bowed out of that role and it was played by somebody else in Evil Dead. Ellen Sandweiss actually who plays Ash's sister, Cheryl, in the original Evil Dead. A young version of her appears in this film, except this time she's the main character and she's Bruce's girlfriend in this movie. The fascinating thing with this film is just finding early versions of these characters, early versions of these people who are at the very nascent stages of their career. They are just starting out, and you can see where the seeds of these ideas get planted. And to be honest, the film still does have its creepy qualities to it. For those of you that might have seen my initial review on The Evil Dead, I mentioned that because of the grainy, low-budget, very, very self-contained way that it was shot, especially because a lot of times they only had one take to get it right in because of the super limited budget and time frame they had to do it in. It almost felt like you were watching a snuff film just because of the rawness to it. And if that rawness is in that, it's here in spades. It's just really, really rough. And like I said, it's an incomplete watch. So again, I'm not going to review it as an artistic project. And one of the other changes is that Bruce Campbell actually dies in this one, and Ellen Sandweiss is the final girl. Maybe because the last thing we see in this film is the reanimated corpses of one of her friends coming at her from behind. And so, like the rest of them, it ends on a cliffhanger. And so that's Within the Woods. Now, they made this film with money donated from friends and family and out of their own pockets for $1,600. By way of comparison, that's just over $7,000 in 2023 movie. So even by modern comparison, that's nothing in terms of budget. And again, the intention was never to show it publicly or not in any widespread festival release. But they still did want to get it out there, and they still wanted to get it in front of people who could fund a full feature version of this. So the next step after they made the film was trying to show people their new story. And they eventually caught a break in which they convinced the manager of a local theater in Detroit to show the film as kind of an opening act in preparation of a midnight showing of Rocky Horror Picture Show. The short film was received pretty well, you got it in front of the right crowd, and the cast and crew were paid $10 for their efforts. No, seriously, that was this film's box office run, $10. Luckily for them, somebody who did see the screening was a movie critic for the Detroit News and wrote a review on it, in which he liked what they had to offer. And so armed with this and with a little bit of publicity, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi were able to start showcasing this in front of people who potentially could give them money. Initially, they wanted about $200,000. One of their first potential investors was a family friend. They showed him the film. He didn't really like it, but he did kind of mentor them a little bit on what to do next with it. Just basically by showing this thing door to door to people, they were able to raise enough money and enough interest to where they were able to take the next step, which was the production of The Evil Dead. And so, once again, I don't know that anybody but the most serious diehard fans of this franchise should even bother watching this movie. It's an incomplete experience. It's kind of your quality and your viewing experiences, your mileage is going to vary on it. As a historical document, it's fascinating, and as what it represents with just school friends' passion project, basically, launching the careers of multiple people and giving birth to some of the most iconic imagery and figures in the horror genre, and one of the more unique directors out there in Sam Raimi. I think it's a fascinating watch. If I can find a link to it on YouTube or something, I'm gonna put it in the comments, because if you're curious, you can check it out yourself and see where the magic got started. Thanks for sticking with me to the end on this one, guys. I know it's a bit different than the reviews I normally do on this franchise, but I think if I'm gonna be covering the franchise, I wanted to start from the very beginning with the first Evil Dead movie. It's never been released on home video, and my hope is one day they might remaster it and release it, but that's remains to be seen if it's ever going to happen. Have you guys seen this? Are there any other horror shorts out there that you think are worth talking about or worth covering? I definitely have a number that I like and that I might recommend in the comments. Again, as somebody who is still very much kind of poking my way into the film industry, something like this is just what it represents is kind of inspiring to me. I've always liked movies that do more with less and that accomplish more with less, just because it's rags to riches. It's a success story, and that's kind of what this little short represents. And it's one of my favorite horror franchises, and without this weird little project, we wouldn't have the rest of it. Thanks for watching. Remember to give us a like, comment, subscribe. We will be covering the rest of the Evil Dead franchise. We have a lot more coming down the pipeline with that franchise this month. And yes, I will finally cover Evil Dead 2. I know I missed out on it in the spring. Believe me, it's the next video that's coming out, so come back to me next week, and I'll talk about a proper Evil Dead movie next time on Full Stop Reviews.